working really has forced us all to significantly rethink how we operate, organisational structures, the ways in which we work, and even challenging or wondering upon, the purpose and value of a physical workplace. So I'm just wondering, for both of you, what do you think are the key challenges facing businesses today?
I mean, the first one is pretty obvious, and it struck us when the pandemic hit and when we were all forced out into the remote world. And it shouldn't have been a shock to people, but it is the fact that people need people, and people actually like working with people. Maybe not all people, but what we found very quickly is that the lack of people interaction caused some real problems in terms of people's sense of belonging to a particular organisation when they were not able to meet on a daily basis their peers, but also their employers, and that was a problem. And I think we're still dealing with that. We did our Future of Work report earlier on in the year, and there was one thing that really grabbed my attention, and that was that it was only 1 in 6 employees said they had a strong sense of belonging to their employer. 1 in 6, which is pretty shocking. So I think that's challenge number one. The other couple then that I'll throw out there, I just want to make sure Colin has nothing left when he attempts to answer this, is in the olden days people just came into the office and that was fine, right? And what we have seen since we came through the end of the pandemic is people are asking a very valid question, which is, why should I go into the office? Why should I go in if I can do my work perfectly well from at home? So I think we need to, I've used the expression before, we need to earn their commute, right? We need to explain to them why it is worth their while coming into the office. And we need to do that by focusing on those, building those person-to-person connections. And we need to do all of that very deliberately, whereas previously we didn't have to do it, it just kind of happened. But then the other side of that is, hybrid means some people are in the office and some people are not in the office. So we also need to be very deliberate to ensure those not in the office are not constantly feeling excluded. And that's small things like meeting etiquette, cutting out the little sidebar conversations that we're used to having. But those are the kind of things we've seen have really excluded people.
Yeah.
And then the last one, and I will shut up now.
No, I can't comment on that now.
No, the last one, because I like it.
Yeah.
I'm stealing this from somebody, but I'm not sure who. It's a real leadership problem at the moment, and that is the productivity paranoia, right? The issue that a lot of leaders have is, they're still thinking, I'm not convinced I'm getting the productivity out of those individuals if I can't see them. And this is at odds big time with what employees are saying, because the vast bulk of employees are saying, actually, we're more productive in a hybrid world. So we need to close that gap, or else hybrid is not going to thrive.
Yeah. And there's so many conflicting reports out that show at times that the productivity is higher, others are saying not. One interesting, concept I came across was there being two types of proximity, like a physical proximity of being seen, but also an emotional proximity of feeling seen. So I think that some of the challenges we have is making sure then that those who are working either fully remotely or hybrid feel recognised and that they are contributing. So it's a challenge for leaders to ensure that happens. That, if you like, connection that you mentioned, David. And Colin, is there other challenges that you see, or reiterating those that ultimately facing leaders today in managing workforces, but also the business in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, so I think first of all we need to look, if we're looking at future work and hybrid and remote and in the prism of the future work, you're looking 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead, right? So, but just let's deal with sort of where we are at the moment. So we've 7 companies. One of those companies is a recruitment company. Another company, we help unemployed people back to jobs. And today we have 1,000 people milking cows on farms, right? So when you look at them all as individuals, and what pre-COVID, what organizations tried to do was have what's called personalization, right? So we had a big problem finding people. So it's like, how do we actually really personalize it for them when they come to us? So for workers, remote has really worked in general, right? So, more flexibility, less commute, more money in their pocket. And when you look at the people who've really been advantaged by, I suppose, remote, women in the workforce, right? So women have come back into the workforce in droves, particularly those over 35, people with disability who couldn't come to an office, right? So, you know, what we're sort of hearing on you know, out there at the moment is organisations starting to look at, we need to get these people back. So we have a talent shortage, obviously, not just in Ireland, but in the developed world. And talking about limiting that, I think, is a real sort of backward step, and something. The challenge, I think, is a leadership challenge to get management right. So the problem is management, really. It's you know, as David was saying, people want to sort of be able to reach out and not necessarily touch, but they want to be able to see people around them, because that's what we were all trained to do. All our courses we did, and management training, supervisory training, you could see people around you. So, and I think, you know, that productivity issue is one that organisations are, you know, we haven't seen all the research coming through yet, and we're sort of getting numbers. All these people aren't working as hard. But I can tell you, if organisations take away that flexibility, they will lose people. Like, there's not, we're seeing it all the time. The first thing people talk to us about, you know, obviously we take salary as a given, so it's like, you know, look, I want this money, but the next thing is flexibility. So, and how that works. The problem, so when you move, so you've three things going on, right? So you've the office, you've remote, and you've hybrid, right? So they're not three in the same. So if, you know, I can't really see a lot of people out there, but if we take a straw poll on ice cream, right? And you ask people, you know, who likes vanilla and who likes chocolate, right? You're going to get, you know, 20% like vanilla, 20% like chocolate. So when you put the two together and you put them into a swirly vanilla and chocolate, you know what I mean, you're going to have a lot of people who are unhappy with that. Do you know what I mean? So I think, you know, the challenge for us is to sort of push forward in our thinking, you know, rather than really in the moment. We've got to figure out the sort of management stuff.
So do you see it like as a mindset shift, and, you know, really that we really need to rethink how we develop and support leaders? And, you know, is it a new type of leadership needed? Or is it really just about that willingness to, if you like, embrace some of the unknowns? Because if we are talking about the future of work and about recreating the way in which we work, and particularly the way in which we develop people, because I think the development will be very important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you like, COVID was almost easy, and you know, I don't say that lightly. I didn't enjoy the process, to be quite honest.
We had no choice.
Yeah, but we had no choice. You know, people didn't need to make a decision. It was just foisted upon us. One day we were in the office, and the next day we were not, and that was pretty much it. But we have a choice this time around, and I think that's what makes it more difficult. You know, Colin, you mentioned hybrid. You have in the office, and then you've remote. You've in the office, and then you've everything in between. And you know, people have not been trained for that, right? But I do think that it is important, certainly, you know, the kind of, you know, in my industry and the clients I'm working with, I think it's very important that they get out now and make the statement that actually, do you know what, we are back in hybrid, right? I think silence is not good, and a lot of people have been silent on it. But I think they also have to say, look, we're back in hybrid because you know, one, you know, certainly the data that we're looking at is saying that's what people are looking for. People are happier in a hybrid model than they are either fully at home or fully in the office. But I think leadership also need to get out there and say, look, we're doing it for the right reason, which is, yeah, we care about you, but we also trust you, right? We trust that you are going to, we trust you with the additional level of autonomy that you have in this hybrid world.
Yeah.
We trust that the productivity is not going to go south. You know, that we're going to get over this productivity paranoia issue. And I think, you know, that needs to be stated very, very publicly, right? I also think simplistically that management and leadership need to do a little bit of, you know, lead by example. And leading by example, I believe at least, is not just going into the office 5 days a week like would have been done in the olden days. And we're still going into the office and going on Teams calls from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening without any break. And I have seen this behaviour, and you're kind of going, this is just the worst of both worlds. You know, we need to demonstrate it, but we need to demonstrate the new way of working properly, whereby we have fire breaks in the agenda, in the diary. We are actually going out, opening the office door, and meeting people.
Yeah, and that sense of planning any of the work time, if you like, in offices, that it's very well structured so that there is, you know, collaborative working structured into it. So I think it is about empowering managers also and the employees themselves to make those times together more productive, rather than coming in and sitting at my desk and, you know, staying on a Teams call.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is that I think some companies have been a bit slow to give a level of guidance, right? And by guidance, I don't mean to find a hard set of rules, but I certainly think, you know, everybody should be clear on what the principles of the remote or the hybrid model are. So I know for us in Accenture quite a while ago, we laid out 5. You know, it was flexibility. It was no one size fits all. It was, you know, we gave people a framework to help them decide when should you be in the office, when should you be remote. But we did also specify everybody should be in the office, you know, should have some level of in-person time as you go through any particular period. For some people, it could be once a quarter. For some people, it'll be weekly. But also, that's all then supported by the culture of you should be able to do your best work from wherever without feeling disadvantaged. So I think people need to define some kind of guardrails to help people. Otherwise, my concern would be we will just default back to the old way of work. Yeah.
And you mentioned talent and retaining and attracting talent, and that being a big challenge. You know, hybrid has actually impacted that. Is there anything else that you would see can be a benefit for leaders to do to ensure that they can retain that talent?
Yeah, look, retention in the short term is a pretty simple thing of organisations trying to give people what they want. And if you think about Nirvana is trying to give every employee exactly what they want, but that's a real challenge, isn't it? You know, it's like just very, very difficult to do because, but if you think about you've all these workers over here and you have, leadership or whatever, trying to get them to, I suppose, what would you say, do everything that they want in terms of keeping them in a role. It's not possible to do that. But I do think there's a sort of a, this type of just going back to the past and, doing things that, this is the way it happened before, you know, in terms of looking forward. But I think there's a sort of a dichotomy going on as well in terms of, this, we could get caught up in this whole hybrid, remote, where we're working type of thing for the next sort of 4 or 5 years. And really what organizations and sort of particularly workers really need to understand is technology is moving really, really quickly, right? And replacing particular workers in particular fields, right? So if you look at things like, where we in Ireland at the moment, we've a real lack of numbers of people within, I suppose, things like warehousing, hospitality, etc. But organizations don't stop, right, and say, right, well, we just need to wait for these people to come in 3 or 4 years. They're building technology. So if you look at the Amazons of this world, you've robots in warehouses now doing an awful lot of the work that people used to do. You walk into McDonald's now, you're tapping on a screen, you're not really being met by people. And we've seen it, like if you look, sometimes you've got to look backwards to look forward. So in agriculture, so we're an agricultural cooperative. In 100 years, there's 10% of the people working in agriculture than there was 100 years ago. You just think about that. So if you fast forward, so this is what's happening in the background while we're sort of caught up with important but sort of noisy stuff, I think at the moment, so workers need to understand that. And the interesting thing about remote is, right, so the roles that I suppose are really suited to remote tend to be the ones that are most replaceable by automation, right? So, and workers need to understand as well. So there's a whole skills thing going on there. Yeah. But, I would say if your job is 100% doable remotely, it may not be around in a relatively short period of time.
Okay.
So it's just something to be conscious of.
It really is, and I think that's...
You've scared a lot of people now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at, so
Yeah.
there's a brilliant writer on this called David Autor, right? So he's in MIT, he's wrote about this for 30 years, and
Yeah.
he has a number of, it's like a repository of jobs, about 700 jobs, and you look at the top and you look at the bottom. Like bank tellers are down the bottom, you know what I mean, that are going to be replaced. Up the top, it's all about creativity, you know, using our people skills, you know, things like musicians and that are up the top, you know, and you know, but it is something people particularly need to understand, because organisations are just going to move forward. They're not going to wait, like, because it's a huge problem now, you know, in terms of finding those workers. So.
It is, and I think it's you sort of incumbent on us all, both from, say, right the way up from education and further education, and in and employers, to build those, you know, critical thinking skills, because they can be applied then as jobs change and roles change. Certainly in Skillnet Ireland, you know, we're the talent agency for enterprise, and what we're looking at really is helping businesses build those suite of transferable skills, as well as quite specialised technical skills, if you like, but broader ones like critical thinking or design thinking or data analysis or data visualization, for example, how to articulate data and bring it to life, ensuring then that we're always equipped for those higher knowledge economy jobs. But one piece of research I thought might be interesting was we're doing at the moment with the Irish Centre for Business Excellence and the University of Limerick, and that interviewed 80 C-suite leaders in Ireland, and it'll be out soon. They're going to introduce the preliminary findings next week at their conference, but one of the findings was that leadership is shifting towards a human-centric leadership. And one of the things you, David, and I were talking about before this was that we cannot leave you know, learning and development solely to HR or learning and development teams anymore. That really all leaders and all managers need to place a key focus on, you know, their own self-development, but also developing the capacities of their team. And we think that is one of the big things that has made a shift in hybrid working, and, you know, empowering, if you like, and building the trust through learning and development. Would either of you agree, or?
Well, you know I agree, because we spoke about it earlier.
And he didn't bring me in on the conversation.
You were off gallivanting. We couldn't find you. Yeah, I mean, look, I absolutely agree with it. I think it's going to be a terrifying prospect to a lot of managers and leaders when they cop on that actually HR are not going to pick up all of the people-related activities, and they actually have to change, you know, they need to grow and pick up a lot of what they would have considered softer stuff themselves. So I think that's going to be really interesting, because yeah, some people will love it, some people will manage it, and some people will not.
Yeah. And, you know, while you're, you know, you mentioned earlier about thinking right into the future, and one thing I think would be interesting, David, would be, you know, that pace of technological change is accelerating and rapidly changing all the time. And for some businesses that is going to mean engaging with the metaverse. So is there anything that leaders should be thinking about now to be prepared or be ready? Or, you know, is there something about this, many of us don't know much about the metaverse, particularly in relation to hybrid working, you know, and ways in which it will facilitate even more innovative virtual working?
Yeah, okay.
I know it's a big thing, but even a few thoughts.
I mean, first of all, yeah, we could spend an hour on the metaverse, and I'm not going to put you through that at this point in the afternoon. What would I say on the metaverse? I mean, first of all, yeah, I think the metaverse is something that people need to consider, and people say, well, why is that? Is it not just the latest fad? I mean, the metaverse is the next generation of the internet, right? And there are much smarter and more important people than me with much deeper pockets putting an awful lot of money into this topic. So that's why I think people need to pay attention to it. I'm going to qualify it with a slight caveat, which is, as often, I will admit it, as a guy who works in tech, as often happens in the tech world, sometimes the hype can exceed the reality ever so slightly. And I think that can create a slight level of skepticism, right? And I think there's a little bit of that going on with the metaverse in the Irish business community at the moment. And I say that because when we did our annual technology vision survey earlier on in the year, the expectation from the Irish business community in terms of the impact on the metaverse on their business was much lower than anywhere else in the world. It was striking, actually. Now, I think that's okay. The level of skepticism is okay, so long as it doesn't get to the point where you're ignoring it. Now, in terms of what do I believe it means to the future of work and hybrid and whatnot, first of all, the good news, I don't see us all going home and putting on a headset instead of looking at a screen.
Damn.
Anybody who has worn one of these things for more than 3 minutes will know it's quite nauseating, so it's not possible. But also, let's be honest, Teams or Zoom, they do it pretty well, right? What the metaverse, I think, does do is it allows us to open up some of the jobs that could not have been done remotely previously, right? I think, Colin, you mentioned warehousing and stuff like that, but we're seeing the control of factory machines now being done remotely, not automatically by AI yet, but by people, using the metaverse. There are German car factories now being operated like that, so I think that's very powerful. And the other area then is in the training space, which I think is more mature. But we've been using that in Accenture for the last number of years to, sheep dip some of our graduates and allow them to experience some pretty real life immersive scenarios that they would not be able to do otherwise. And we had that before COVID, and that was really invaluable during that time because the rest of their training was all at the end of their beds, which was pretty bleak.
No, exactly. We're finding the same even with the immersive technologies. The biopharma chem Skillnet is doing it where they can save a lot of money and also do quite specific stuff from a clean room, if you like, on the virtual headsets from anywhere. So I suppose before I ask you the final question, there's one or two questions from the audience. One is about the opportunity then, if you like, in globalization for Ireland to benefit from our own talent and workers, but also from engaging with people based anywhere in the world. Do you see that increasing, or opportunities for hiring in people from abroad, if you like? That was one of the questions from the audience.
Go first, Colin.
Yeah. So look, it's obviously remote as makes the world a much smaller place. So we've people working for us today in Ukraine, software developers, and obviously there's challenges there, but they're still working away. So remote has made the world a much smaller place. But just back to your last question, and I did a paper on this a couple of years ago, and around. So if you imagine who makes the decisions right now in HR around your people and where you hire them, and whether you go and hire them in Kazakhstan or Texas or Dublin. If you can imagine how technology is improving, and that the decision making of that, would you leave that over to a robot to make that decision in 10 years? So the robot decides, well, do we hire people or do we hire more AI to do a particular job? So I think that's something that's going to, because we're allowing machines to make much more decisions for us on where we do things, how we do things, etc. And it's creeping in onto the people side, and government obviously, trying to legislate for this, which can be usually a bad thing when they stick their size 12s into the middle of things, but it's something that's coming down the track. So.
Well, I know from being on the remote working panel, there's a lot of great stuff coming from it, and certainly the voice of enterprise is being considered. But how about if we, to round it off, is there anything, either questions you think leaders should be asking of themselves now so that they can begin thinking about that 10 or 15 years, or tips for future-proofing themselves for the future of work? If you could both have a think as your last few words of wisdom for our audience here today.
Well, Colin's thinking, I'll start talking.
We can hear him thinking.
So you owe me this one. Look, I think, I'll repeat what I said earlier on, which is I think it is so vital for leaders, right, to take ownership for where are we going with this, right? And how is it going to affect our people, and how are we going to drive their skill development? And I think the days of leaving that to HR and the business leaders thinking, oh, it's enough that I'll focus sales and revenue and various other things, I think those days are gone, right? And I think we need to be building that kind of mindset into the next generation that are coming up now, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, as leaders really just need to listen first, I think, you know, to their own people,
Yeah.
to, I suppose, peers, expert, take all the information in, and then try and create their own future and for their own organizations, you know. We get too many people just followers of others, and those that go out and just try and create their own futures, you know, are the ones that tend to do really well, and we've seen that with many great Irish organisations over the last few years.
I think mine would be that what's great about Irish companies is the willingness to work together on some of these problems, whether it's through an industry body or, you know, through some of our 70 Skillnets, for example, because they are examining these and ultimately working together to determine how can we, you know, all build our own skills and competencies, because each of us will continue to develop and need that. So I think the working together will also help in framing some of these questions and, you know, working out these new pathways or journeys for leaders. So thank you all very much for listening today. Any questions?